Mick Eastwood, a poker coach. Surely you're not qualified to be a poker coach. You must be a poker scammer. Thoughts?
Considering I'm loaded my student's account with the money, it feels harsh to call me a scammer.
Tell me about this student. Who are you hoping to coach? Because you're hoping that I can train you to become a coach today. So who are you coaching?
Yeah, exactly. So we did mention it a bit on my channel. We've already done a first episode over there if you wanted to check out how that went. But basically, his name is Jake. I met him through my work with Easty Poker. We did a few shoots together. And on the first time I met him, he had on his phone background was the hand ranking. So I was like, this guy's great. So he's never played a cash game hand before in his life. He's played a few sit and goes, and that is it. And a few pub games, but that's it. And he's really funny. So I'm hoping it's going to be entertaining, but we're here to make sure that I don't let him down.
Well, make sure that you let him down as minimally as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
On your channel, we've already done the first episode of this. And I think when we first started, what you sort of naturally wanted to do to teach poker, because I was pretending to be, maybe not Jake, but I was pretending to be a student of that level. And you were kind of narrating. It was like you were streaming, because that's your normal gig, right? So that was kind of normal that you were in that mode. Before we kick off here with the Jack 7 of Spades in the small blind and have a look at this crazy hand that actually culminates in a triple barrel bluff. Before we look at that, what did you pick up from the first session, Nick? Like, what kind of things did I tell you about coaching, or did you see me recommend that were new to you, and what you're going to bring to this video, the second edition?
I realized that this is going to be a lot harder than I thought. I didn't really know how to explain things. I knew things. I felt like I knew things, but I didn't know how to explain why I knew them. And I was kind of just like going off on a tangent and saying things that didn't matter, and like going way above, the level that I'm going to be helping. Well, the main thing that we talked about was me asking you what you've done and why, see if you can like pick out any big problems and like nip them in the bud early and explain why they're things you don't want to do or say. And then also getting to the actual true EV of things.
True EV.
Like, talking about frequencies and like overcomplicating stuff, like saying this is better than that. So just do that kind of thing, which is what we touched on. Keeping it simple, probing for issues, and trying to figure out how to explain the concepts that I thought I understood, but clearly don't.
Yeah, because like you don't really know what your student's mindset is and like what their thought process is until you ask them, because you can go through a hand and we can be like, this is fine, this is fine, this is not fine. You shouldn't have done this, you should have done that. And they'll get something from that, but that's nowhere near as helpful as give me all of the inner workings of your mind in game and out of game. And even trying to distinguish between those two things sometimes is really helpful. It's like, okay, I hear what you're saying now, but what was in game you thinking? Because sometimes like the performance side of things is to actually try and speak to the person that has 8 seconds to act that's playing the hand, right? And that's why it's so important to keep it simple and keep it accessible, because you want your student to be able to apply everything that matters in a very short frame of time and not get bogged down with the things that don't. So coaching is harder than you thought. It's definitely really tough. And I think that there's not a lot of understanding in the industry about what a good poker coach or teacher really is. I think there's a lot of people that think that the more advanced you are as a player, the better you must be as a coach. And it's that simple. But I think it's actually a lot to do with how skilled you are in the act of like teaching human to human as well, which is just not easy. And it's something that I've had to get better at over many, many years. Every day I'm a bit less bad at it than before, and I just try and get better. So Jack 7 of Spades here.
Yeah.
I'll put on the student hat. I'll be the student. I'll come at you with like a bunch of obnoxious bad thoughts like board coverage, and you're going to have to talk me off the ledge of board coverage. So let's get into it. You're the coach. Let's go.
From the sneak peek you gave me, I'm already going to absolutely love this. I think I just want to put more money in. That's all. You've opened the small blind. That looks good, Pete. We've got ace 5 6. Thoughts?
Yeah, so these boards are ace high, so I probably have like a big range advantage, probably like better for my range, and I can rep ace king, and he can't have ace king, so I'm going to bet to rep ace king.
Okay, I remember how difficult this is now.
How much fun I have being an absolute pain in the ass, basically. Yeah. It's great.
You basically just say as many problem phrases as possible and then leave it to me. When we did this before on my channel, I really struggled with like pinpointing exactly, and I just explained the intro, pinpointing exactly how to address that in a way that, because my first thought was, okay, it's blind versus blind. You've got to be thinking in terms of ranges, and everyone can have a lot more hands. Therefore, the volume of ace king is not as relevant in these positions as others, for example. So we don't just get to do whatever the hell we like on this flop. That'd be where I would go to.
Yeah, if I got a thought like that from the student, I think I'd also want to go to something regarding repping as a term and just be like, is repping like commonly part of your thought process? Is that the way you think? And if they say, yeah, I like to think like that, you can say, well, what does that have to do? Going to your second point in the intro, what does that have to do with EV? Like, what does the fact that you are thinking about Ace King at this moment and trying to pretend you have to do with the EV of your bet? Like, does that make it better or worse? And then what you're trying to elicit there is that it doesn't really affect the EV of the bet. And it's a real skill, but you're really trying to like hone in on what the logical fallacy is. Like, where is there a breakdown in causation between their thoughts and the expected value of what the play they're sort of defending with those thoughts? And that's really hard. It takes a lot of practice.
I can't believe how difficult this is. Like, I thought I understood this game. I do. I think I do understand it, but not in a way that I can explain to like a beginner.
But that's layers of understanding, right? There's being able, like, what's something you know inside out in life, like, other than poker, like, which you've obviously been dedicating yourself to for the past few years. But is there something that you're like an expert at that you like know loads about?
Probably the closest we come would be football, I suppose.
Right. So I don't know that much about football, especially like English football. So if I was asking you about that and you were explaining it to me, that subconscious, smooth effortlessness that you would feel, we will get that with poker eventually. But first we have to go through like the sort of conscious, like clumsy phase. Yeah. And I think the more you do it, the better you get at just like it going into your subconscious competence. And teaching is one of the things that actually made me understand the game on a much deeper level, was having to teach it and being accountable to another person that's paying me money like that, you know, and that was something that forced me to really learn what was going on. So I think this will do wonders for your game as well. All right, so we bet the flop. Neither here nor there. I think it's fine. And you could go smaller, whatever.
Yeah, that was another thing that we need to focus on, that I need to focus on, is that if it's close, then don't worry about it. Just leave it. Like that sizing, we could have gone here or there. It doesn't matter. Whatever. That's not where we want to glean the biggest nuggets possible.
That's it. So when a student comes to you, they want the biggest bang for their buck possible, right? Or if this guy's getting it for free, he still wants like as much progress as possible with the time that both of you are investing. Yeah. And you will be tempted as a coach to get bogged down by everything you look at, like every single street you see. And a real skill is knowing when to say, no, we're not discussing this because there is lower hanging, juicier fruit that's going to be better for your game, and actually getting to that. So I agree, ignoring sizing there within reason when you're just working with someone for the first time. I think that's great. Get more from them, elicit things from them, figure out how they think about the game first.
So the turn's a 10. Pete, what are you feeling about this card? How do you want to approach this turn?
I feel like because I'm the pre-flop aggressor here, I have a lot of good hands here. I think I have pocket 10s all the time and he doesn't. So therefore I should bet.
See, I'm torn here because I feel like I want to say, yeah, we probably do have like a decent advantage in some areas, but like, why do you fixate on pocket 10s exactly is what I want to ask, I suppose.
Good. So now you're getting to the point of like the student's clearly got like a completely inappropriate obsession with the nuts here. You heard it on the flop when this like fake guy I'm impersonating talked about ace king, and now he's going straight to 10s on the turn. So you can see that this student has a widespread thing. And what we talked about in the first episode as well was just being able to actually identify the generalizable leaks that are going to come up time and time again and really nip those in the bud. Those are the ones you want to cater to. So I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, they do this.
Yeah, see, now I really want to say, why don't we bet bigger? But like, I'm not sure if that's too nickety-pickety.
Well, I think first off, there's a theory point here to teach that's quite important. And that is that there is a requirement out of position for equity, usually, when you're blasting. Like in position, you can kind of do what you want on cards that are good for you on the turn in these spots where you have the big nut advantage. I think out of position, this hand probably has to give up in theory, and it might be worth saying something to the effect of, you know, theoretically, there are standards about what you bluff on the turn when there's still one card to come, you know, when you're out of position, because your fold equity is just less in game theory than it is in position, right? Therefore, you need to compensate for that with some kind of equity, usually, or not potential. So I might make that point, and then whether, I think it's an interesting question, like, do you introduce overbets here to the student? Like, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
That would depend on the level of the player. Like if you thought this was someone who was really struggling to just understand when to bet and when to check, you'd start by just saying you can bluff a lot on cards like this, but have some standards when you're out of position. And that would be the thing I would try and get across. Whereas if the student was a bit more advanced, then I would definitely take on the challenge of like whether to bring in capped versus uncapped spots and polarization to a higher extent and over betting with a big nut advantage and stuff like that, and why you might do that. But I think the really tough challenge here is for you to try and decide when and where is it appropriate to teach Jake things, at what point in his journey.
Because my mind immediately leapt to, okay, double pretender, I want to bet 2E, and then I want to jam the river on certain cards. But like, I can't say that to him because it's not going to make any sense. So I need to like attack it in a different way, which is obviously going to be quite challenging for me. Because when I press the 2E button, I don't even think about. I just like, okay, it's you know, there's no straight available, you know, nut advantage. 2E. It's like, but this is not going to make sense to him immediately. So I like generally that we've bet, but like, would you say you're not on board with this then as Pete coach?
As peak coach, I would say that I don't think it's going to be okay in equilibrium. I don't think it's going to be awful because the 10 is a better card for you. Like the 10 is one of the cards that big blind folds on the flop at the highest frequency. And it's definitely like a part of our sort of range. So like range advantage wise, like EV advantage, it gets better. I'm not saying we'd be overbetting here with a 10, of course not. That's not what I'm talking about.
No.
But in general, it's an okay spot. So whether you can bluff with zero equity on the turn is a direct function of position and how favorable the situation is for your range. And this is a relatively favorable situation for our range, but it's not amazing because the small blind range is still junky and we are out of position. Therefore, I just have higher standards than this in theory. Like if you want to say exploitatively, the line of bet big and overbet river might be really good, or bet this size and then overbet river. That's a different argument, and you could try and have that discussion. And I think another thing to be really clear about from day one with your student is like, when are you talking about theory and when are you talking about practice, and trying to get the student to understand that there are things that are just objectively, like theoretically true about poker, and there are things that are like good because of how humans play, and like understanding that difference is super key.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we'll leave this then. I was about to ask you, now you have nothing, Pete. Now the king of spades, what's the plan?
See, I'm really conflicted in spots like this because, like, on the one hand, I don't have any showdown value. We're at the bottom of our range and we have to bluff the bottom of our range, right? Like, we always have to bluff the bottom of our range. And then, secondly, I just feel like they never fold. They never fold. So that's a bit of a problem.
Okay, so two things that you said there, Pete, that concern me. The first one is, what makes you think they never fold?
I just feel like I get called by stupid hands, like, pretty often. Like, hands that shouldn't call, but they do just call.
Okay. This is so hard, guys. I can't tell you how hard this is. What has that got to do with the EV of your bet, really, in reality?
If they call me all the time, then the bet's bad, right?
Yes, but what actual evidence do you have that they're going to call you all the time? Do you actually believe that's going to happen? Like, what, is that really true?
So this is maybe where I would move from. I think you've got the right line now. Like,
okay.
Clearly you can't make the case that it's irrelevant to your EV, like how often they call, right? Because that's super relevant. But you could make the case. Of course. You could make the case that the student is wrong. I've said like mostly elicit. Like at the start of a node, your job as the coach is to start eliciting, right? To like make sure you understand their thought process and give the student a chance to go into like productive mode where they're actually producing thoughts for you, right? Rather than just being a rabbit in the headlights trying to absorb everything.
Yeah.
But once you've done that, there's probably a time when it's right to stop eliciting and start feeding in truth. So you imagine that eliciting and truth feeding are like two of your weapons in your coach arsenal, and you need to sort of balance them and make sure that you're using the right one at the right time. So when I'm saying I feel like I get called all the time, you as a more experienced player than the student that I'm emulating here, you could then say that's not the case. There are lots of spots where your fold equity is higher than it needs to be, where humans are overfolding actually, but there will be a reason why you feel like you get called all the time. That's very common. It's really common for people to feel like they get called all the time when they don't. And that reason is probably something to do with how the brain stores adversity, like adverse experiences. Like it stores painful things and things that hurt. And it's like a kind of ouch, I should never have, caught with the hand in the cookie jar kind of feeling. And that's very powerful feeling for a human, right? To be caught bluffing. So I think here it's worthwhile just saying, this is actually a spot, like doing a bit of theory explanation, like, the king is great for your range, you're bluffing a lot of queen jack on turn, not a card that's so good for your opponent, like you do want to follow through here with a lot of your missed stuff, and you will have quite a lot of fold equity. And then explaining that the reason the student feels a resistance against that is actually due to more mental game stuff, like the psychological reaction of just being called in the past, and how much stronger that gets etched into the psyche than the times a bluff works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because when a bluff works, you feel relief most of the time, right? That's
exactly.
The main feeling. And how memorable is relief? Like how many times in your life can you actually go, I remember that sense of relief I got that day. That was amazing. It was incredible.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely.
But you can probably remember the day you like poured a thing of boiling water over your leg or something like that.
If I did that, I would certainly remember that, not very fondly.
There's
another thing you said.
I remember it.
You did. Oh, Jesus. That's why you said it. There's another thing you said, which was, we're at the bottom of our range, so we have to bluff. We have to bluff. So we're at the bottom of our range, we have to bluff. And I know you're trying to elicit something from me there in terms of like nipping something going on there. I love bluffing at the bottom of our range. I also like bluffing this spot. I guess it'd be something along the lines of, just because you're at the bottom of your range doesn't mean that you definitely should bluff. You should look at how do you expect humans to play this flop turn, and then do they have a lot of folds by the river? Even if you're at the bottom of your range, if you don't think you're going to get folds, you shouldn't bluff.
So there's two layers to this. One is the exploitative layer, like you're saying that if it is underfolded in real life or something, it doesn't matter that you're at the bottom of your range, you should still be giving up. The other layer is that if it wasn't an advantageous spot for bluffing in theory, like if your fold equity wasn't particularly good, you'd have loads of hands with no showdown value, right? Like you get to this river with 9 high, you get here with 7 high, you get here with 4 high, you get here with jack high.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter where you are in that region. It doesn't matter whether you have queen high here, pocket deuces. Okay, deuces maybe has a bit of showdown, but like against some people. But let's say like it doesn't matter whether you have queen high, jack high, or 7 high. They all lose if you check all the time. Therefore, if it wasn't such a good spot for your range, because this river was, let's say, a 10, which is a pretty awful card for your range, then you have to give up lots of those hands at the bottom. You can't just bluff all of them. And there's no relevant distinction between 4 high and 9 high in that case either. So it doesn't make sense to say, let's bluff the 4 high because it has less showdown value than 9 high. So there's a theoretical and an exploitative exception to that.
That's a really good point. Thanks. Okay.
Cool. Okay, so let's wrap this one up now. We did get called by the ace-9, which is neither here nor there. The student will start saying things about the showdown a lot of the time, and you just want to kind of guide them away from that and say, no, we're done here. We're not going to talk about that because it's a bad habit.
Okay. Jack 10 off, defending the big blind. Seems fine. I don't care. Either way. Whatever. Flop a pair. What are you thinking here versus a small bet?
I don't know if I want him to just like see a free card when he's got like king, queen and stuff like that. So raise.
Okay, well, is king, queen the only thing that player 3 can have?
No. I was targeting that when I said that.
Okay, well, just because you target something doesn't mean other things don't exist.
But targeting.
Okay, but is it king, queen, ace, king, all the hands that player 3 can have? Is that everything that they can have?
No, they could have like aces.
How does raising do against that?
Really badly.
Okay, so maybe we should call?
Yeah. But I guess if he has like 7-6 or something, he might bluff the turn, or he might bluff me off later.
Okay, well, that hasn't happened yet. Nothing's happened yet. So let's just deal with that when it comes to it and just play the current street that we're on.
And this is an excellent opportunity to just weave in something about polarization. Like hands have investment ceilings, right? Mm-hmm. And if your hand is a bluff, like, okay, it's a different subject altogether, but if your hand is a value candidate, and if you raised here, it would be for value, you really need to get across to Jake that in poker, there are 2 reasons for betting and raising on the turn and river, or for like raising a flop. And those are value and bluffing. And if he's doing anything for something other than that, you can just say bad. So you can take a really highly reductive approach here, where you say if you're doing something for a reason other than value or bluffing, and it's an aggressive action on the turn or river or a flop raise, then it is just plain bad and you're not allowed to do it. And that reductive approach is great because it limits the options. Poker's overwhelming. It almost feels like a sandbox where you can do whatever you want when you first start, and you can almost invent any reason for any action. So having that reductive framework is really useful.
Yeah, I like that. That's a much cleaner way of doing what I did. Okay, Jack on the turn. So I see, I would have just expected us to have already checked. So like, how do I? Because I wouldn't have asked them. It just would have happened, I guess.
Yep, it would have happened. So then
well, you would have already said. You probably would have said, okay, I've got 2 pair now, something like that. I'm going to bet, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Okay, Pete. So there's a jack on the turn.
So these hands, by the way, guys, are from one of my students that plays 25 NL. So these are not my hands, just in case there was any confusion about that. There probably was. There was probably one guy out there that's like half eating like his takeaway and drinking a beer and half watching. And he's like, oh, this Pete Clark guy's a fish. He's a scammer. Yeah, just for this guy's benefit, these aren't my hands.
It would help if you could beat 10 and L, by the way.
It would
to
help,
dispel those.
But then you couldn't be a poker scammer. I mean, poker coach. If you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The reason I bet here is that I was worried about it going check.
Oh, God. I mean, I was so prepared to deal with so many things that you said there, and I just don't know what to say to that. That's a possible scenario, but can they not just bet?
Yeah, I guess they could have a betting range.
Okay. So why would you? Okay, so why would you dog? Like, how much would we put that in a productive way? Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, so does that make this better or worse? If they do have hands that will want to bet themselves, how therefore does this bet do? You know, against all of their range, against all the hands they can have.
I mean, this bet's probably kind of good against if they have like king 10 or something. If they have like 4 or 5 diamonds, this is probably good.
Yeah, you're right, but those aren't the only hands that they will have. They can also have lots of hands that want to bluff, which this stops them from doing. And they can also have lots of hands that want to value bet, which prevents us from being able to check raise.
Excellent. So that was a really good explanation there. So you elicited just enough, and then when you'd heard enough bad stuff to be like, right, I'm not going to get anything else that's helpful out of the student here, you then came in with like the injection of truth and like showed them why they were wrong. So it's about getting in there at the right point, a bit of eliciting, and then when they've said everything that you wanted them to say that explains how they were thinking, that's the time to start guiding them to the right answer. And some of that can be more questioning, and some of that can just be telling at that point.
Yeah. Okay. And now what?
I don't want to scare them off here. Like my first thought is that like just what am I going to get paid by if I go big, right? There's just nothing that's going to pay me off. So I'm probably just going to go 8.
Ah, God, this is horrible. That shouldn't be what drives your sizes, Pete. Your sizes should be driven by your perceived equity in the hand. So how often do you think that this is the best hand?
Really often, like almost always.
Okay. So is it therefore worth less or more money?
More money.
Okay. So a bit more money.
It's that easy? Like, wouldn't I be unbalanced if I just go bigger when I've got more equity?
I don't care because, you know, I don't care.
Right.
Because
not quite the right answer. I think there we can say, well, you're balancing it with bluffs, right? So whatever value sizing you're picking, you know, in theory, you have bluffs.
The reason I said that is because I wanted to say, well, you could block this hand because you block a lot of calls. So you could block or you could check. But like, obviously you could do those things, but I'm trying to keep it even simpler and just be like, okay, we're going to play 2NL. So if we've got a good hand, I want him to bet, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And if he does block this hand at 2NL, a lot of people won't raise with like kings and stuff like that. And it's just going to be an absolute shit show. And they're not going to like bluff raise ever. And it's way, way better to obviously just overbet or something, regardless of the blockers. So I think that was a reasonably good response there from you. This student is clearly like, he doesn't really understand how EV works, the guy I'm impersonating here. Not the guy that's playing the hands, but the one I'm sort of, the impression I'm doing. Because he's always just picking one part of the game tree and running with that. And that's actually really common. There's a reason although these thoughts sound kind of ridiculous, there's a lot of people out there that do think like that in the moment when they're playing. And I think what we're trying to do with like this guy I'm impersonating is we're trying to just get him to realize that EV cares about more than what he's currently thinking about, that there's this like game tree of possibilities. So when it comes to like sizing the river, you could throw in a bit about, well, what if he has kings? Like how much would he call? You could say something like that. And then the guy might say, well, he would call 30. And then you can say, well, betting 8 is 22 big blinds lost against kings then. Just get him to see that other side. Like whatever side of the game tree your student is over prioritizing, basically shove that other side that he's not thinking about in his face and say, look at this. This really matters too. And give him some shock examples to drive that home.
The way he says, well, so you're targeting kings then?
Then we say, no, not just kings, but there is a big portion of, you almost got me there, there's a big portion of the opponent's range that is good hands that are calling. So we do want to target, if you will, their range, right? We want to think about what their range is and play well against it. We just don't want to pick out really small parts of their range and target those. I think that's the explanation. Okay.
We didn't even get to see what happened. That's how much we care about.
That's what happens on Card Corner. We torture the audience.
Yeah. Okay.
So not a terrible sizing, but I think the student could have gone a bit bigger here. The dunk on the turn is really bizarre. I mean, I don't actually think it's that terrible, because like many of the hands that bluff in real life here under the gun against big blind are like nut gutters that end up calling your lead anyway and stuff like that. So it is strange. I don't actually think it's like as disastrous as it looks, but it's probably going to come from a flawed thought process.
Yeah. Blind versus blind here. King deuce. Okay. Whatever. Okay. What are you thinking? This is a big bet?
Yeah. I mean, this is full of shit. Like, if you had it, you would bet small here to try and get action, right?
Why do you think that?
That's what I would think that way, maybe. Like, that's probably what I would do.
Okay. Does that mean that everyone else is doing that?
I guess not.
Okay. So we have no real evidence to suggest that this is actually weak.
Yeah, and what you'll find is that you start to get frustrated when the student has the same kind of leaks in every hand, and it's just like going on like that. And I don't get this so much these days because my clientele is a bit different, right? But when I first started coaching, I would teach people that had like barely played as well. And you really have to see the world through their eyes. You have to like bring yourself right down to their level. And instead of saying like 2E, you just have to get right into the, okay, let's go back to absolute basics and just question everything they say until they can like dismantle it themselves and piece together a new framework. Sometimes you need to get them to dismantle their own web of ideas so they can build up a better one. I suppose we should call here then, because they could just have nothing, right? Like they can have value hands, but they can also have nothing. Is this too good to fold? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, kind of.
You can just agree and say, well, absolutely. And you can maybe say something like, well, why is it too good to fold? It's got 5 out, redraw when behind. It's got backdoor when behind. And it's also just the best hand in incredibly reasonable amount of the time. So something like that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. What are you thinking? You 2/3 pot. What do you want to do?
I had no idea what the student was going to do. So I wanted to see.
Yeah.
I want to call again because the 7 is more in my range than his.
Okay. I don't have a problem with the call, but do you not think that we're blind versus blind, so much like that first hand, both players have a lot of 7s because the ranges are at their widest. Do you not think it's possible that they opened a 7, bet a 7 on the flop, and are now continuing to bet a 7 just as often as we could have one? or at least
so
similar.
what you're doing here, I don't actually think this is the right way to go, because
Good. Okay. Tell me what to do.
Because what you're doing is you're disagreeing with the premise.
Okay.
But the conclusion doesn't follow from the premise. So I think that the premise might be true. Like, Big Blind probably has a richer density, if you will, of 7x here, right? Because it's just less diluted by really big cards and really big pairs, for example, than it is in small blind's range. So it's probably right to say that the 7 is more in our range density-wise than his. We're not saying he doesn't have a 7. But it doesn't follow from that we should call, because whether we have lots of 7s in our range or not has absolutely nothing to do with the EV of calling this hand. If anything, it makes the EV lower because our overall range is stronger, and in equilibrium, our opponent's strategy would tighten to reflect that. So actually, there's no link between the 7 being better for one player or another and actually calling the turn with this hand. So I think, like, one of the things you have to do in coaching is figure out where is the student actually making an invalid argument, where the conclusion just doesn't follow from the premise. The easy thing to do is attack the premise, and that's the most natural thing to do. But finding spots where that logic doesn't follow, that's way more useful for the student, because then they can stop repeating that everywhere in the game tree. He's probably making leaks like that all over the place if he's saying that, you know.
Yeah. Okay. I don't care either way about call.
Oh, I think this is definitely a call. When it's blind versus blind, like the starting configuration, we talk about this a lot in grade E of the Carrot Poker School. This is the mass data course where we really care, like, about position. I want to give one thing away for free. Like in lecture 1 of grade E, you will see that position has a dramatic effect on whether you want to continue in different spots. And when it's small blind, when that starting range is small blind, the propensity to overbluff is just through the roof, just based on the fact that you begin with like all of the combos of like Jack 10 off. Now, I don't think this is a particularly attractive spot to bluff for like a regular or for a good player, but for a recreational player that's just landing here with everything, this just gets overdone, you know, for this sizing. So I think this is easily a call, and it only becomes close in theory, not in practice.
Okay. Oof. What are you thinking, Pete? They've checked you, 6 of spades, 2 paired, board, flush draw, completes.
Yeah, well, we've still got the showdown value of the deuce, so we're just going to check back.
Okay, do you?
Oh, wait. Shit, so that was a really good response. You just say, do you? Excellent. You don't say anything. You just get them to figure that out on their own. It's way stronger when you get them to do that. All right, shit. So we're actually losing to ace X now and stuff like that. So the question is whether we bluff. I don't want to bluff here because I don't know what I'm repping.
Wow, this is just so wildly difficult to tackle. Like, my brain's just like...
So when I say I don't know what I'm repping, what's your instinct there? Like, what's the, like, if you could say anything you wanted and you weren't like trying to be nice to a student, what would your instinct be?
My instinct would just be that that's entirely irrelevant.
Right. So that's that flashes into your head really quickly, correct? Like when I say that, you get a thought of like, that's so irrelevant.
Yeah, it just doesn't matter. But I need to like, it's the process of knowing it's irrelevant, saying why it's irrelevant, and then guiding to relevance. That's what I'm struggling to do all at once.
Yeah.
On camera.
Yeah.
It's difficult, man.
What you could do is like, I think as you get better at understanding EV yourself, right? As you become like as good at understanding EV as you are at understanding like the managerial decisions of Chelsea or whatever it is you care about in football. Not that then.
Not that.
Then you'll begin to be able to just, you know, freestyle stuff automatically. But until then, really ask yourself consciously, what is it that does determine EV here then? Like, what is it that affects most directly the EV of bluffing? Like, if a beginner said, what makes a bluff higher or lower EV on the river in general, what would you say?
We talking true EV?
Yeah, of course, always.
Sorry, I didn't drum roll. Whether the spot's overfolded or underfolded.
Exactly, just what the fold equity is. So you just have to say, well, what range does your opponent get here with, and what does that do for our fold equity? And if you guide them towards that, and you do that thought process first, maybe, you can then circle back round to what are you repping, and you can get them to elaborate on that, and then they'll realize that it's just way less relevant than what their opponent's really folding. Because if you determine that fold equity is really good, for example, now personally, I think this hand has a ton of showdown value, and I'm probably just checking it back, right? Because it's king high and it's just doing really well. But if you did get to a conclusion in some spot that you should bluff because fold equity was sky high, you then circle back round to what am I repping, and you realize that you've already answered something so profound and important that this question just can't matter anymore.
Yeah, so like if we had 10-9, I wouldn't be... Say we did have 10-9, then we could use that line of logic to arrive at a bluff, I imagine.
Yeah, then I'd imagine we just have to bluff with 10 high here. Yeah, absolutely. In theory and in practice. Even with king high, you can probably say something like, you should bomb. Like, in theory, this is probably a check, but you could even come up with an exploitative argument here. Like, what will they actually do with ace high or overpairs if you bet 1.5x pot? And how often do they have a boat or flush? And the answer is probably like, they very rarely have a boat or flush, and they're probably folding almost always with one pair to that sizing. So I think you could even argue for an exploitative overbet here. You don't want to bet smallish here, and, you know, in theory, it probably checks king high, but I'm not so sure that it isn't just better to bomb this in real life if I'm playing my A game, to be honest.
I agree with you.
Right, we're going to do one more hand, and then we are wrapping this video up. We're going to let you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Very unusual to record on a Sunday, but that's what happens when I'm a boomer and mess up the first recording.
Glad you said it. Right, blind versus blind. We've got pocket eights. We get 3-bet. We call. Whatever. Okay. Jack 9.
No donk bet this time.
Thank God. I didn't know what I was going to do if he donked there. So we're facing a very large bet. What are your thoughts?
I'm guessing we should call and reevaluate the turn. Like, we're going to call here because we're going to reevaluate later.
That has no relevance to whether this call makes money or not.
I hate that. I'm getting to like use all of my most hated thought processes here. It's so fun. It's like satire.
Yeah. Does the turn have any relevance to whether we make money by calling this flop?
Yeah, or in other words, like, just because you're not going to stop thinking on the next street, that doesn't mean that you can call. Like, you could go reductio ad absurdum here, right? You could like reduce this to full absurdity by saying, so you can do anything you want as long as you're not going to stop thinking later.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. We're going to reevaluate this.
Yeah, sometimes that's the best way to go, is just to like reduce to full absurdity, like what they're saying. Yeah. Well, I didn't really know what to do here. Honestly, it's just super confusing. It just looks really weird because I just don't know if he's got it or whether he's bluffing.
I mean, I'm actually pretty confused as well, to be honest. Yeah, that doesn't really matter. We're just facing the bet that we have, and then we just have to decide whether we have enough equity to continue. Do you think that we do?
I'm just worried that I'll face another bet later and I'll have to fold to that if I call this one.
Fucking, that doesn't matter.
You know, I think you're saying a few two things don't matter. Like,
I don't know what to say to you. That doesn't matter because we don't always face the bet. But then I'm talking about the turn.
Mm-hmm. You're allowed to talk about the turn. The only thing that was wrong with my first thought is that I used the fact that I was going to reevaluate to justify the flop call. The fact that we are, like, when someone bets this big on the flop in real life, they're not a regular, right? So I think I would start by doing a bit of detective work here. You could say, well, who does this? This is a confusing spot. I agree. This is not clear to me either, by the way. So it's not like I'm sitting here knowing exactly what's going on and you're confused. Like, it's not, this is unclear to me.
Yeah.
But one thing I would do is I would say, well, who is this? Like, what have you got on your plate? Who's this player? What kind of animal are you looking at here? How do they behave? And then they would say it's a weaker player of some sort. You'd say, we call them fish on Carrot Corner because we're not afraid of offending anyone. They'd say, okay, I'll call it fish from now on. And then once you've done that, I think it's easier to say, well, the 3-bet range pre, you can start playing spot the difference, right? Whenever you can start playing spot the difference, and you do need your student to know a little bit of theory before this works well, but once Jake is at a level where he knows a bit of theory, you can say something like, what is the difference between a theoretical 3-bet range here and a weaker player's 3-bet range now that this player has outed themselves as a likely weaker player with that flop size? And then they can say just,
more erratic.
Or just like more linear, actually. I think there's less bluffs, right? There's less like Jack 5 suited and stuff like that. A bit more linear. The sizing is quite a strong data point in a 3-bet pot from a weaker player. So already I don't think folding here is unreasonable. Like, people will look at this in a solver and say, oh, you shouldn't fold. But like, in real life, you're doing pretty badly here. And here's another useful inductive thought, right? There are aggro fish and passive fish, and the more aggro ones are probably going to barrel the turn a lot with like their gutters and all of that. And the more passive ones are just going to be not doing this as a bluff in the first place. So I think already you can just like fold this hand as an exploit. That would be my verdict.
Yeah, I would just fold. I mean, what I want to say, I'm trying to say what I think you want me to say rather than what I just want to say, which I don't know if is the correct thing to do or not. I usually would just say, like, if I was doing this hand review with somebody in my Discord or whatever, and I wasn't coaching them or anything, I was just like, oh, I think this. I'd be like, yeah, we'll just fold here. It's just like such a whatever spot.
Yep.
Like,
so take that and lead the student there then, right?
Yeah.
Like, take that and say, try and figure out why you think that and try and lead the student there.
There just aren't that many good eventualities. Like, things don't happen that are good here very often at all. And we could just avoid, we've been given an out here by them betting 14. We don't need to continue against this size. It's just way too unclear how we're going to make money in this spot to me. So I would just fold.
Yep, I think that's absolutely right. And this is a golden opportunity to zoom out like we talked about before. Remember last time when we recorded on your channel, we talked about key golden opportunities where you can take an example hand and use it, like extrapolate from it and use it as an example of an overarching concept that's going to be really valuable. And here it's the difference between equity and EV. You can say, well, even if our equity is like quote unquote enough to call here because it's like 29% or 30%, that doesn't mean that we have 30% of the pot in EV. And the reason why we don't is reverse implied odds that like we just don't really ever draw to anything amazing and our opponent like can. And also just position, a lack of position, and also just like that tendency thing I talked about where the aggro players keep blasting and the passive ones haven't bluffed in the first place, right? So all of those things reduce EV further than our equity is here. So I think you're on the right line. So we did call there, which I think is actually losing against an unknown at 25 NL in this line.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a fold. Now what?
Now I think I should fold, but maybe I didn't, because when people do this, I just feel like they're attacking me and I don't want to let them do that to me. Like, I don't want to be bullied. We finished the last video with a mental game thing. Let's do it again.
Yeah. Okay. Why do you feel that?
Because I've shown weakness. Like, all I've done is call and then check and then call, and then I checked again and I've just shown tons of weakness, and they're just bullying. They're just preying upon me here.
Okay. The fact that you've called, I'm just going to say what I think I would say instead of trying to guess. Do you think you would have done anything different with your really good hands here than what you've done?
Might have. I would have 4-bet pre if I had like kings.
Okay, but you've got a lot of jacks, right?
Yeah, I suppose.
Would you have raised the flop with those, or would you have just called?
Might have raised.
You might have raised it against the big size.
So again, Nick, you're attacking my premise, right? My premise was like, I'm being attacked here, and you've basically said, yeah, you probably are, but you could have a jack. Like, you're almost like indulging this a bit too much. I would actually say you might be being attacked here. You might be being bullied by some people in the pool, but overall, the level of aggression in this spot from the pool is insufficient for us to have enough equity to call the turn, even though some people are attacking you. So you could just say something like, the thing you're feeling is valid and it's true of some people, but it's not true often enough. And then you don't have to worry about, like, am I protected? And that's almost indulging the fear. Like, if I was afraid of spiders, it would be really bad therapizing, is that word, for you to be like, well, have you got your spider hammer on you to crush the spiders that come near you? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Spider hammer.
Like, have you got the spider hammer? Have you got your spider-proof suit? Well, you'll be okay then, probably. Like,
fuck's sake, this is going to be so hard. Okay. Yeah.
It's pretty tough.
There's just insufficient aggression from the average player here to continue.
That's it. Get to the point. You're taking what the student's saying too seriously. You're almost indulging it sometimes. Sometimes you just have to, like, bat it away as, like, just wrong. Like, no, well, you don't have enough EV here. You don't have enough equity here. It's a continuation of what we said on the flop, actually. So just make sure that you don't stray too far from EV, because when we start talking about, like, our own range and how protected it is, that's not actually relevant to what's going on here in EV anymore, you know? Check. We do win this one, and then this is where you really have to
fight. Just ignore.
You have to pry the student away from this, because they're going to feel like I did right here, and they may even want to defend it. You know, they may want to even, like, argue with you because they have the validation of this result.
Yeah, definitely they will. Especially someone as beginner as what I'm going to be dealing with.
All right, so I think we should meet up again when you've done a bit of work with Jake. You can come back with any of your problems and concerns, and we can do some more of this. And maybe we even, like, get Jake on or whatever, or go over some of Jake's hands or get him involved.
I'll definitely be bringing some of Jake's hands to you, because we originally thought this would just be what it is, what we've done. But I think there's some longevity to this in terms of, like, my commitment to Jake. I want to make sure that I'm the best I can be, and clearly I'm not. So it would be good to keep, checking in with you. Maybe every third time come to you instead of doing the hands with him on stream, I can do them with you. Or I could do the hands with him off of camera and then come to you and say, well, he said this to me. I can write down all those things. I think it'd be really cool to keep going with this rather than just make this a one-off.
I think it's a cool concept. And I would even push that further and say, if Jake is not, like, too camera shy or whatever, he'd be welcome to come on one of these calls with us, and we could have, like, a sort of almost like a tiers of coaching kind of thing, where I'm, like, the sort of guy at the back of the room assessing your teaching as you're teaching.
Yeah, the teaching assessor. Yeah, that'd be good, man. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of it. But yeah, good luck, Jake. You're gonna need it. You're gonna need it, chat. From all you've got.
No, I think you're definitely getting better, and this was a Sunday as well, so I think you performed pretty well for Sunday afternoon. All right, guys, you know what to do if you like the stuff. It's Carrot Corner for more. Subscription service is launching on March 1st, 2024, and there'll no doubt be more stuff with Easty soon. Take it easy, and we'll see you later.
Thanks, guys.